Andre, do you want to do an intro, or should I just go into this?
No, I will. I'll do an intro to you. I'm sorry. Have a seat over there.
All right. This will all be edited out in post.
So I appreciate you guys coming here and doing these things with us. These Wisdom Keepers talks. I understand that speaking in front of people is not the easiest thing to do, but I'm hoping that we can all feel comfortable enough to share what we understand. Today we're going to have Ken talk about some things that are important to him. That's my seat. You sit next to me, though.
No.
Oh.
Really, I'm cool with that.
Now you're in my cowboy.
Yeah. Now you're in my cowboy.
Just sit here.
Sit right there.
I'm good.
You're next to outside.
Way over there.
Either there
Look
or
at all
behind
the I'm so confused. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyway, people, Ken's discussion is about
Chaos.
yes. So perfect for our lives. Most of our lives, right? So he's going to talk about that, and I'm curious to see how he's going to intertwine Stevie Wonder into it.
So am I.
So, Ken Yee.
All right. So I want to talk to all of you about chaos and just how to manage it. But let me first pose a question to all of you. What does chaos mean to you? Master Dave, what does chaos mean to you?
Chaos right now is everything out of order.
Everything out of order?
Yes.
Okay. Ryan, what about you? What does chaos mean to you?
I'm big on mythology, and to me, chaos means not so much evil, but the unravel of order.
The unravel of order.
It's
Okay.
always a balance. Order creates, chaos unravels it.
Okay.
And the cycle.
And one more opinion. Anyone want to offer a thought on chaos? Yeah.
Chaos is the product of entropy.
The product of entropy. Nice, nice.
Chaos to me is the source of my creative energy.
Ah, that's good. That's good. So I've come to think of chaos as something that appears unpredictable, out of control, and just happening so fast. It's important that it has this appearance because I don't know that it's any of those. And I think in a lot of ways we can sort of learn to cope with each of those. To start with, it's something really unpredictable. Often things will have like a starting moment, but then it'll progress. You sort of have an idea of where it'll go. It's like if someone throws a baseball, you can almost track the trajectory of that baseball. And I think part of managing the unpredictability is pulling a little bit of order from disorder and then trying to track where all these moving parts are going. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think there is an order to it, but it's not necessarily a simple one. In terms of things happening too fast, to really manage, well, one of the things that we've learned in our Kung Fu class is that we can train ourselves to take in everything that's happening. Something that's too fast for some person may not be so fast for all of us who've had a chance to practice it. And then the whole idea of things being out of control, well, sometimes they are out of control. One of the things I like to think of, one of the things I like to size up is, what are the elements that I can control? What are the elements that I cannot control? And then there's like this gray area in between. And one of the things that I strive to do is to figure out what I can control, and then I think one of the things I'm exploring is then what can I do with this gray area? How much of that can I bring under my control? So one of the things that I like to think of is just like things that have happened to me in my own life. 10 years ago, I was kind of in a rather complicated spot. I was in between jobs. I'd been unemployed for a few months. I had just seen the end of a 10-year relationship. And then the real kicker was that my house burned down. I had a therapist who actually described all of that as Job-like. And you all know the story of Job, right? It's like misfortune after misfortune after misfortune. And it really threw me for a loop, as you might imagine. Quite frankly, it was rather traumatic, and it's something I would rather never repeat. But one of the things that I kind of learned from that experience is that, okay, I remember, being asleep and my housemate woke me up, Ken, the house is on fire. or actually, the fire was just like right outside of my place. So, I remember looking down the hallway, I could just sort of see out of one of the windows, and, my car was literally a fireball. And one of the things I remember is like, oh, well, okay, that's that for that car as I'm making my way out. But, the lesson from that is, sometimes when you're in the soup, you're in the soup. It doesn't matter how you got there. You are there. You got to do something about it right then and there. Maybe I'm fortunate in that I could sort of process that horrific thing so analytically just to get out of the house. But I think, that sort of opened up the whole idea of like being able to regulate your emotions, when everything looks like it's going to crap. And part of that is not panicking, not being overcome by fear, not being overcome by worry. And all of those are natural human reactions. But I think one of the things I've, maybe learned to do over the years is sort of, one, I accept it as a natural reaction, but I can also regulate it, and I've decided that, well, okay, this is going to totally freak me the hell out, but I can't let it happen now. In fact, one of the tricks that I've done is like, okay, if I'm in a situation, that this is completely insane and I need to freak out, well, I will, and this sounds a little insane, I'll schedule time to freak out, but later. Or if it's like a work situation, everything is so stressful, it's like, okay, I need like a minute to unravel. And I will literally set a timer for a minute just so I can spend a little time unraveling, processing all of that. But then once that period is done, I'm back in it. That sounds a little psychotic now that I think about it, but the thing is, this is something that I've learned over the years. It takes practice, and it doesn't always work. But I think one of the things about that, it is important to acknowledge your emotions. It's important to process your emotions. It's important to not cut yourself off from them. And anything you can do to facilitate that, I think is a really useful thing to do. Like one of the things that I've learned is, like my yoga practice is one way I learn to process my emotions. Like after having gone through unemployment and a relationship and a catastrophic house fire, I recognized that at some point I was just shutting down emotionally. But then, one of the things that I noticed, there are certain yoga poses that I've done, mainly back bends, that will help unlock emotions. So, after all of this stuff happened to me, I had like temporary housing in San Francisco. I had like basically condo insurance to cover the cost of housing. If you don't have like condo or rental insurance, I kind of encourage it. But one of the things I noticed one time doing a back bend practice in yoga is that, hey, it was tapping into these really strong feelings, these strong emotions. And once I recognized it, I just dove for it. Just so I could process all of this trauma. I think it's vitally important to process the trauma and the emotions, and do what you can to do it. One of the things that I also think about is, have any of you read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? Brilliant piece of science fiction, and science fiction comedy. And one of the big messages from that is, don't panic. and that's something I like to think about. Also, I know where my towel is all the time. But so your emotions are part of you. Listen to them. We always talk about intuition and emotion is going to be a part of that. And it's kind of tricky because you can also be pulled in different directions by your emotion. But listen to what your body is telling you. The body knows. And then at some point, all the practice that we do with intuition is to hone that sense of, I have this body feeling. Well, what does that translate to? So another thing that I like to think about, and this goes back to the idea of chaos being unpredictable, is that I'm not someone who's ever gone surfing, but in a lot of ways, managing chaos in my mind is similar to what it would be like to surf. You have all of these waves, everything is unstable, but somehow when you're on your board, you can find a path to navigate through it. So, but what does that mean in like an everyday situation? Part of that means figuring out what's happening, what actually makes sense. When you see something that seems completely out of control, size up the situation, take a deep breath, size it up, try to figure out what makes sense, and then try to construct things from okay, you think this, you have an idea that this is happening. Well, if this happens, then what's going to happen next? It's sort of like this whole tree of consequences and cause and effect. In some ways, you can sort of start thinking a few branches out in terms of how this tree of cause and effect is going to play out. And then, if you can keep a level head, you start making choices, and then you can start influencing how things will start to play out, how that tree will sort of blossom out. And part of it is just saying, okay, if I do this series of actions, this is the most likely outcome, and working with that. It may not work out that way. You may make mistakes here and there, and things may start to proceed different ways than you expected. But then what you can do is just, okay, this has happened. Often what I'll do is I'll reevaluate constantly, and okay, my original plan was this, but things are going to start playing out differently. I try to imagine, well, how will this play out? What are the most likely outcomes? And I'll try to move things towards that direction. It doesn't always work that way. Again, I think the process of reevaluating is accepting that you're going to make a mistake and learning from it, and then quickly coming up with the next move or the next series of moves to try to surf those waves. One of the things that I remember is like in my first job out of graduate school, I worked for the Intel Corporation. And there are a number of corporate values that come up. And one of them that I do think about is, one of the values is risk-taking. And at that time, I was never comfortable with risk. I was always, kind of influenced a lot by fear of failure, always trying to do the right thing, always trying to stray away from doing risky things. But, at some point, a lot of what it means to take a risk is sometimes putting yourself out there. This is what I believe. This is how I think this particular situation is. I don't agree with your analysis. Here's why. And having that conversation. And, over time, I sort of became used to, taking risks. I mean, they're not stupid risks. They're informed and measured risks. Maybe a good way to think of it is like jaywalking. In some ways, you're taking a risk when you walk across the street, against, without the light. You kind of have to pay attention to the traffic that's coming. Does it really make sense to jaywalk at that time? But you're looking at the situation. You're informing yourself of what that situation is, and you're making a determination. Well, okay, is it a good idea to cross at this point? There's this idea. I don't know if it's true. Maybe someone has done some statistics on it. There's this belief that it's safer to jaywalk than to actually cross at the crosswalk. And the argument behind that is, and you'll see this all the time, especially these days, there are so many people who have their phones out, they're crossing the street, they're not paying attention. That to me is very different than someone who is jaywalking but alert, making sure that there's enough room to actually cross the street without getting run over. There's a different level of engagement. Let's see. So another thing that's important is being open to possibilities. We often get sort of stuck in things that we're comfortable with, something that's familiar, and just in the whole vein of risk taking, it doesn't seem like a risk that makes sense, even though, on some sense, if you're open to it, that may be the right thing to do. It's just something that you're not familiar with, and that's a tricky thing. Just sort of being comfortable with things that you're not inherently comfortable with. But part of risk taking is then trying it and seeing if it works. It doesn't have to work. Sometimes it won't, but in the process, you will always learn something. Even if it's something about yourself and your comfort with this particular method, it may be something that you'll never do again, but at least you've gained some experience in that. The other thing to consider when in the midst of a chaotic situation, something to watch out for is indecision or not making choices. One of the things to keep in mind, you're going to be overwhelmed with an array of choices, and that can be crippling. One of the things I try to do is I try to simplify, and it's important to make a choice. It's important to realize that not making a choice is its own choice, but it's a choice where you've given up all control. You're sort of letting everything else dictate what happens instead of making active choices and trying to influence the situation. Always reevaluate. You're going to make a mistake, and that's fine. But reevaluate, learn from your mistakes, modify your course of action if you need to. And I don't know if I have much more to say. Like I said, this is a lifelong practice. Take little informed risks every day. Get comfortable with it, and then see where it leads you. I think I'm going to close actually with a quote from Andy Grove, who ran Intel when I was working for the company, and it was kind of an interesting philosophy, but his idea was to quote, "Let chaos reign, then reign chaos." Yeah. Thank you. Any questions?
How do you weave, what do I want to ask? Not introspection, but listening to your true nature into the analytical side of this that you describe. Is there a place for both?
There is a place for both. Intuition is kind of a tricky thing because I think it's a combination of experience, analysis, and also emotion. Now some of those things can also lead you down paths that you may not want to, or you can be pulled by certain things. And a part of the training that we do to sharpen our intuition is to not be pulled. Sometimes it's important to say, okay, I've got like these three choices. You can come up with reasonings for why any one of those three are good choices. At some point, your true nature is going to be, okay, which of these feel like the right choice? And another thing that I keep in mind is like if you've thought through these alternatives, chances are they're all going to work in some way. There are different ways of solving problems, and there's no reason that one of them has to be the only way to do it. So if you have three reasoned choices, unless they're like completely opposite to each other, which can sometimes happen, and that's the scary part. But if they're all pretty similar, sometimes the best thing to do is just to pick one, because you've given it some thought. They will probably all work. Yes.
So is chaos really something that is like someone's perception of chaos, someone's perception of an event?
I think it is. And this is tricky because on the one hand, I'm claiming that there is an inherent order to something that we see as chaotic. And maybe there is something that's completely random and genuinely chaotic and has no rhyme or reason. How often do we run into those situations, though? Yeah, there's a bit of a risk of trying to impose this mindset of order on something that may truly be random, but I don't know if it's truly random, at least not in terms of like our everyday experiences.
So are you saying that if you look at it philosophically, that chaos is just kind of a construct of depending on what we label it to be?
Yeah, I think you could say that.
If somebody were to come in and watch our Kung Fu class, they could say that it looks very chaotic, but there's us, it's completely ordered.
Yeah, we have a different perspective. This is actually something that came up at work. Working with some of the clients, we were just befuddled by some of their reasoning and why they would do certain things, and it was sort of in conflict with how we wanted to do things. But then at some point, we sort of step back and try to reassess how we're engaging with them, and we sort of took the approach that, okay, this group, they have their very specific job responsibilities, they have their own organizational constraints. We were just trying to tease out, okay, they're probably doing this because they're not empowered to do some of the things that we would like them to do, and this is sort of how their organization runs. And once we made that connection, we could actually connect better with the client, because in a lot of ways we were trying to get them to do things that they were just not empowered to do. So we had to adjust our message. To sort of be, we sought to better understand how they were approaching their business so that we could better serve them in their business. But part of that is also sort of letting go of our own preconceptions and paying attention to what's important to the client.
One more question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
I wrote it down. When you say you want to process the traumas, because we always talk about that, what do you mean by that? Like,
not run away from
say I
it.
have a trauma that occurred.
Okay. Well,
How exactly do I
you don't want to lock him in a closet and just never acknowledge him, right?
to acknowledge it?
Yeah, absolutely acknowledge it and almost engage with it. It's something that's happened. You can't change time and make it not happen. But then, what is it? What are the impacts of this trauma? Why does it resonate with you? What's important to you?
These are all the questions you asked, and that's processing.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is this is what you do to process.
That's what I do. Yeah.
All right. And that is processed, right?
Yeah, but even just sort of like, okay, what does this feel like? I feel like completely, so this has happened, I feel completely nauseous. Okay, if I need to throw up, I'll go throw up. Yeah. But you don't want to shut down those feelings. You don't want to cut yourself off from that.
What does your unraveling process look like, and where did you learn that?
My unraveling process?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
You don't have to share it if you don't want to.
It's for me, just like when I was diving deep for this feeling. For me, it was like a feeling of overwhelm and just incredible loss at having all of these things.
What do you do what does it look like? Are you asking yourself questions? Are you pacing?
At some point, I may start off asking questions, but it's something I just really felt in my body. And at some point, I was doing my yoga practice and literally sobbing through it because of all the emotions that it was unlocking.
So this idea of giving yourself time to, scheduling a freak out, that was something that came to you to do?
I may have picked that up from someone.
That's cool.
I know. It's like, okay, here's the situation. This is totally insane. I'm going to panic about this for 2 minutes, but then 2 minutes after that, I'm on it.
What does your panic look like for 2 minutes?
Oh, a lot of swearing.
Yeah.
Which may not be that different from how my normal thing was.
That's cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
So one more quick question. If you were to give a white belt a single takeaway from this discussion, just a simple thing, what would you tell them?
Take risks, but take informed risks. Yeah.
What was your process to pick chaos as your thing to share with us? How do you?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I guess, in a lot of ways, I think it's something I'm fascinated by. Like the whole idea of things not being entirely under control, but yet being able to influence it nonetheless. Yeah.
I had a two-part question. The first thing,
Okay.
in a chaos fire like that, what did you grab?
What did I grab?
And the second part of that question is, what does the definition simplify mean to you?
Oh, I'll answer the second part first. I actually don't remember what I grabbed. I think I actually just got out of there. I think I grabbed like a backpack, which may or may not have had my wallet. I didn't know at the time, and it turns out it didn't. But I had a backpack. So for, when I think of simplifying, it's like I'm someone who can really overthink a situation. It's like I can come up with like 10 things to do, and that's just too many things. It's like, for me, it's like, what's important to me? What is the one or two things that I need to do to move towards that? And I just try to let all the other stuff, all the other 8 possibilities, I just don't focus on them. I kind of deprioritize them and just focus on what's important. Yeah.
I guess my question is, when you are or you feel that chaos is there, do you step out of that, like to look around and see what is happening? And I guess the second question is, if you choose to jump into that, to go back into, do you go back with the purpose of fixing something or to ride along with what is there?
Well, I think usually it's to ride along with what's there. Now, unless I'm like supposed to be fixing, a chaotic situation for work or something, there it becomes a little more tricky, because then it's like, well, what's causing the chaos, and trying to address that in the midst of the chaos. But your question about whether I try to step away from chaos is an interesting one, because I know that in a lot of ways we often talk about being the eye of the storm, that calmness where you can see everything. But actually, one of the things I kind of like as an idea is not to be the eye of the storm, but to be the storm. You have the calmness of the eye, but you have all that power and destructive capability as well. And that's kind of something I picked up here.
Question.
Yes.
When you even experience chaos, do you know where a part of your body you feel that?
I feel my shoulders tighten up. I feel it's like a tightness in my gut.
Has it changed since you've done Kung Fu?
I think what's changed is that I tend to, breathe a lot more. I think one of the ways I react to it is I always try to find my weight. Try to feel the balance of my feet, and but even then it's like we do ground fighting, so it's like it's always an option. So.
And Stevie Wonder?
Oh no! So this is funny, because when I saw that email this afternoon, it's like, oh crap. Okay, so this is something I've been cagey about, actually. Yesterday was my birthday. And it was my 50th birthday, so it was kind of a big one. Yeah, I'm younger. I look younger than I am.
Yeah, you are.
So actually, and this will actually tie in, believe it or not. One of the things that Stevie Wonder did in the late 70s, he was at arguably the height of his powers. The music that he was doing was highly regarded. He could almost do nothing wrong. One of the things that he was a big supporter of was legislation to make Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday a holiday. This was really important for him, and it was in some ways controversial. He got death threats, I'm sure. I don't even know what it would be like if he tried to do that today. I can't imagine it would be any better or worse, frankly. But he put in the work. He made it his thing. He was public about it. He lobbied Congress. when it went to vote in Congress, I think in like '79, it failed. It was a different time than today. I think it failed by like half a dozen votes or something like that. And then he produced a single called "Happy Birthday," which, if you listen to it, it's all about having a holiday where you celebrate peace. And finally in like 1983, Congress did approve the holiday. It took some time in doing, but he made it work. But he took a big risk because, and I think part of it he could do that because he was at like the peak of his career. I was reading this comment about that, and this is Stevie Wonder, who had the Jackson 5 as his backup singers for some of his songs. So, that gives a little bit of a buffer.
Yeah, Jeff Beck played on this.
Yeah.
Beck is there.
Yeah, no, but he put his career at risk to push for this thing that was not necessarily popular, and years later it worked out.
Do you think he could have made that song as good, Happy Birthday, as good as it was if it had got passed?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I don't know.
Because he sung it with his heart.
Absolutely.
Just,
I mean, the motivation might not have been there. Yeah, I don't know. I'm going to be controversial and say, well, you could kind of look at all the other stuff he was doing during the 80s, but not as good as the 70s stuff.
Okay, that's enough.
Right, Barbara.
So when did you learn all this about Stevie Wonder in relationship to, because you come not knowing about Stevie Wonder, right?
No, when I started Kung Fu was 5 years ago. It's like, my vision of Stevie Wonder was like this call to say I love you and like Ebony and Ivory. So no, it's yeah, I know. you can pin that on McCartney, but no, but I just started listening to his albums from that time period, and it's like, wow. And then like I got to the 80s, like.
We'll give you a pass on that.
All right. Did you have a question, Ryan?
I was gonna have two, but Andre.
Yeah.
But other than that, when you were down in the spiral of your relationship, your work, your house, car, your wallet, or all of this stuff, was there a certain turning point where you got back on your feet, or was it progressive?
It was progressive. I kind of floated for a bit. But ultimately, oh gosh, I was like burning through like savings and like other, you can't be unemployed for too long. But bit by bit, piece by piece.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Hey, this Saturday we are going to have another speaker. It'll be Dorian.
All right.
Be talking about being a teenager and what? Stuff.
What's it like to be a teenager?
As most teenagers do. But if you have or you know of a teenager, bring it. Okay? Just bring it to the class. And, it'd be good for them to hear. Or even younger, 13-year-olds and things like that. Would be good. Can they hear that stuff? 13?
I think so.
Yeah.
That's PG 13 or like.
Is it PG? Like, can the children?
Can Riley go? Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Sure.
All right. So bring some of the teenage people with you. Okay. All right. How'd you find this room? Excellent. I mean, what about the chairs? Can we stack the chairs against this wall?
Oh yeah.
Really
Chaos. I know.
I can feel chaos in this room.
All right.
Much more serious. I saw this chair on its own. Your baby is magic. I
And I enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for the talk.
Oh, thank you.
with you in your points about authorization.
It's interesting how you're gonna be interested to see how you're gonna consolidate the conflicting.
Well, one of the things I need to work on, once my shoulder is healthy again, is like in my fighting, actually like sowing chaos.
There we go.
And then taking advantage of that.
Just change your name to Loki and
There you go, exactly.
So how long did it take you for you to get your job back, to get an job?
Oh gosh, it took like so let's see, I had been unemployed for...
.com bust?
No, I had worked at a couple of startups and I was just like burned out. It took a little over a year.
I lost my job right at the beginning of the .com bust.
Okay.
The company that I was working for got bought by somebody else, and they brought somebody in to replace me because that person traveled with the senior executives in the company.
Oh gosh, one of those deals.
Yeah, so it wasn't because I was good or bad, it was because I just wasn't one of them.
Yeah, it was not about you at all.
So I was out of work for 14 months, and it was probably one of the hardest
That's pretty
times of
stressful.
my life.
Oh, absolutely.
It was the end, 'cause you know what?
Jeez, yep.
Burnt through $80,000.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe it. It's like, I don't have a lot more going here.
Yeah, I know, I just...
So the pressure got worse and worse.
Yeah.
Thank you, young man.
Thank you.
Happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Remember, it's the same
I had a question for you.
Yeah.
I realized I should have asked it.
That's okay.
Do you think it's like a positive thing or a negative thing, or there's a balance?
Chaos? Oh, I think it just is.
Just is?
I think in a lot of ways we impose whether something is positive or negative on the situation.
Right.
But in a lot of ways, that's sort of how we deal with it.
Like, what my question is more if a person suffered from a lifelong kind of a lifetime of chaos,
Okay.
as they might perceive it.
Okay.
Would that be? I think you're saying that it's like a force, right?
Yeah,
Chaos is like a
it has
force.
an energy to it.
Right. But do you think, like, on a person's life, would that be, is that ultimately positive, do you think, or ultimately
Thank you. And I think that really depends on the person.
Yeah?
I think some people may just be worn down by all of that. Other people may thrive on it. They may be able to, get the energy from it and then figure out how to deal with it. Hey. Oh no, that's okay. I understand.
I made it in there.
Yeah.
I got it.
All right. I should probably return the mic. I'm gonna do the thing where I go like to the bathroom and
I like to keep the cameras rolling, like even after.
Okay.
Because like with Kathleen, I don't know if you saw the video. But
I didn't.
talking to her,
Oh, I'm bummed I missed that.
It's on the website.
Okay.
Yeah. Good job, man.
Thank
for
you.
sharing that.
Yeah.
Try to get this out in a couple of days.
Cool.
Look forward to it.
Right.
Thanks.